All right, we're going to go ahead and move on to our speaker. And I'm trying to think how best to introduce our speaker here. I've known Commissioner Costello for a long time, and a lot of the people that help us with our matching challenges and all, a lot of times would prefer not to be known or recognized publicly for that. It is public information. Anybody gives over $50 to OPEA PAC, that's public information. But Mark has been very generous to us for a number of years. He's been a member of OPEA PAC for a number of years, even years, long years before he was actually elected to state labor commissioner. And I know him to be a man that loves the free market, the free enterprise system. He's a very successful businessman. He believes in that. He's a man of convictions. And I was thrilled to see him in this position because not a lot of people can make a real positive difference in this position. But I knew Mark would want to do that. So I think probably the way to introduce him is call me Mark Costello. That's right, folks. He's the right fellow. That's right, folks. Please welcome State Labor Commissioner Mark Costello. And sorry for the poor job of singing.
Well, thank you, Charlie. Hey, that's music to my ears. I mean, I talked to Gary Jones one time, and before the 2010 election, he said, I didn't lose in 06 and 02 to a man. I lost to a jingle. Remember McMahon? McMahon, yeah. So I think our jingle's better. And Charlie's right. I stumbled in. I don't even know exactly when I first stumbled into OPEA PAC. It was when you're up at the Golden Corral, which no longer even exists up in Edmond.
Tore the building down.
Tore the building down. After you guys left, there was no business. And we had fun there. It was a lot of fun for me to go there. And at that time, I had no idea that I would someday choose to stand for office. I had no idea that some of the formation that I had at OPEA PAC would form me as both a man and as a future candidate. But I remember my best day ever at OPEA PAC was when I stood at the place over on Lincoln against my two worthy opponents in 2010, the majority leader of the House, Tad Jones, and Jason Reese, who had been out on the trail for over a year. And I knew if I could not come to this club, if I could not come and win your hearts and your minds and your vote, that I probably ought to just get out of the race, really. Because I felt that I had something in common with my friends here. C.S. Lewis says that friendship implies a common vision of things. To see the world in the same view is a prerequisite for friendship. And I came there that day, and I spoke, and it was a good day, 4 minutes, the best 4 minutes of my life, perhaps. And who's counting, but I got 81.4% of the vote that day. Thank you all very much. And so that was really the launching of my campaign in 2010. But what got me into the race in the first place was what happened in 2008. For those of you who have a stronger stomach than myself and could stand the entire State of the Union address last night, some things are not new under the sun, at least for the last 4 years. The same old things. The disinformation, the disingenuousness, the outright lies, the manipulation. We heard it again last night. I was actually refreshed to hear Senator Rubio in his response. It uplifted me. It gave me hope. And I still have a lot of hope. But let me speak, if I may, about my new office. And a couple of things. Please, Liz, keep me on time. Okay. A couple of things that have come about over the last couple of years. Let me start with dues checkoff for political lobbying efforts. At the last convention in last spring for the state GOP, I had introduced a resolution saying that Ronald Reagan was right. He said, defund the left. let's defund the left. He didn't say, let's take funds from the left. But what has happened in Oklahoma over the last 10 years is the exact opposite of what Ronald Reagan said. 2004, before the Democrats took over the House, that's not that long ago, but now we have over 75% of the House are Republicans, all professing conservatives, by the way. In 2004, the amount of money that went from the Oklahoma Public Employees Association to Democrats versus Republicans was $34 to Democrats. Every $1 that went to Republicans. Well, that makes sense. If you read their website, if you look at their formation by Pat Hall and the Democratic Party, they are really about the status quo. Keeping government as it has been. Continuing the legacy of the previous century and the party of the previous century that dominated Oklahoma politics. But things have changed. And I give them credit I give them kudos for being spot on in knowing that we should follow the money. Because today, they don't give $34 to Democrats to $1 for Republicans. They give $2 to Republicans for every $1 to Democrats. So it's exact flip. 34 to 1, now it's 2 to 1, the opposite direction. I am offended by the idea that the state of Oklahoma, since Gene Stipe and his crew introduced it into law in 1977, where they turned the state of Oklahoma into the bag man for the unions. We've collected hundreds of millions of dollars for the Oklahoma Education Association and more recently the Oklahoma Public Employees Association. Hundreds of millions of dollars for not one penny at expense to the taxpayers. That's bad enough that we're doing their bidding for free. What offends me even more is that we're doing their bidding at all. Politics does not belong in the paychecks of public employees. Not for the John Birch Society, not for the Republican Party, not for the ACLU, not for anyone. Doggone it. And in fact, we have laws to this regard. We have ethics rules to this regard. So I have requested the Attorney General to rule on this. To me, it's very clear. It's very clear that when it says politics, the politics does not belong in government. There's specific rules about that. And first and foremost, you don't collect money on their behalf. We will see what the general shall rule. Shall decree. I'm hopeful. I am hopeful. Because at the end of the day, I am somewhat discouraged from what has happened in the legislature. Last year, in the state Senate, it went before a committee that we stopped being the bag man for the union bosses. We stopped collecting money for political purposes. You know what the vote was? $15,400 to $4,800. I mean, those are dollars. $15,000 was contributed to those who voted to keep the status quo, who voted to keep Oklahoma in the business of collecting money on behalf of political partisan efforts. It's discouraging, but if any of you read the news yesterday, it's not the first time nor the last time that we will be discouraged when it comes to money in politics. There's a good little clip recently help me with this name, by the former Washington lobbyist, Jack Abramoff. But he's kind of gone, now that he's out of prison, he's kind of gone the reformer route. And he says that if those people tell you $5,000 or $2,000 doesn't make a difference, they're not being genuine. They're not being truthful. It does make a difference. And all I'm suggesting is that the Republican Party should have cleaner hands and purer hearts than that. We introduced the resolution at the state convention last year. It passed with the help of many of you here in this room, as well as thousands of others around the state, to say one very simple thing. Republican candidates for office ought not, after May of last year, to accept money from these liberal PACs, the OEA and the OPEA by name. It passed, and we will see if anyone will pay any attention. I do know it made a bit of a difference in Senator Dom's race. Representative Walker's race, it can make a difference in the future. Because at the end of the day, it is not the money, in all due respect, that OPAC has contributed. That is important, but not as important as the grassroots of this party. The grassroots of the Republican Party are not found, by the way, in the fairways and the greens of country. Some people think that's where they're found. In the country clubs of this town and of this state. No, they're found in the precincts. They're found by those who are willing to knock on doors, and they're found in clubs such as OPEC, if not specifically OPEC. Hopefully the Attorney General will rule and do the right thing and follow what I believe, in my opinion, is not just the right thing, but the law. Politics and the paychecks of public employees should not mix. You see this here. It's kind of big and simple. And I once heard that things that are good are simple. Things that are evil are complex. I can't think of anything more complex than Obamacare. It started out as several thousand pages, and now it's morphed up to nearly 20,000 pages of rules and regulations and manipulations of our lives. I took a 220-page bill before for the House of Representatives by Representative Mark McCall. And that was a lot of words, too, 220 pages. And I reduced it to just, really, 7 words. The challenge that we have in Oklahoma in regards to our workers' compensation is we have this system that Gene Stein put together. Lo and behold, we had an administrative system in this state until the 1950s. And at that time, Gene Stipe and the Stipe Law Firm and the members of his party, and I want to point out a couple of things to you. I know this isn't real high tech, but I think it is, once again, pretty simple. Let me point out first. Stipe said in an article in 1976 that he had been the principal author of every workers' compensation measure since 1948. Well, that's the reality. From 48 to 2003, 2013, we still have a system that Gene Stipe put into law and is being perpetuated by those people that would like to see Oklahoma with a very special interest for workers' compensation lawyers. Thank you, Charlie. And this is not original. I mean, it's not like it just cropped up in the last 50 years. The governor of Oklahoma, Governor Williams, said in 1918 that he urged Oklahoma at that time to adopt a workers' compensation system to protect injured workmen, to throw the economic loss on the industry where it belongs, and to do away with ambulance chasers and the damage suit men, also known as trial attorneys today. And you can see that we've kind of come a long ways when it comes to ambulances. But we're still doing business with the damage suit. This became evident to me when I traveled around the state, went to businesses when I was campaigning, that the problem was very, very simple. We have not, it's workers' comp, not lawyers' comp. We need an administrative system. Now, the problem in the analysis is simple, the politics is not so simple. I went, along with Denise Cross-White-Hader and Jim Marshall and myself and someone from the OCPA, we went to Arkansas. We sat down with the commissioners. We visited with them. We analyzed what they had. What we found out is that over 20 years ago, Governor Jim Guy Tucker led the Democrats to reform their system, which was very, very poor shape at the time. Let me go over that. Governor Jim Guy Tucker, before he went to jail, fixed the workers' comp system. So a crooked governor and the Democrats got it right. What's wrong with the Republican Party in this state that they cannot fulfill their obligation to the taxpayers to create a level playing field for businesses? And I think, dare I say, as they said back from Watergate days, follow the money. Tens of millions of dollars have been put into the coffers of both Democrat and Republican politicians. They're apolitical. Those people that advertise on the back cover of Yellow Pages, they don't care who keeps the system the way it is. We spend $2.58 in Oklahoma for what Arkansas spends $1. Think about that. We went to a facility earlier today with 100 employees. Let's say they spend $1,000 a year, that's $100,000. Arkansas, those fees would be about $35,000. What we have is a scandal, and what we need is not a degree of change. We need a different kind of thing. We need an administrative system. Last month of 2010, I founded a 501c4 called Workers' Comp, not Lawyers' Comp. And at that point, it was kind of like, hey, you look back, there wasn't anyone there following you. Because the legislature was going to come out with this new reform, and we all waited. We waited until the end of 2011, and ta-da! Well, at the end of 2011, the difference between Arkansas and Oklahoma was $2.29 versus $1. Now it's $2.58. Boy, I don't consider that real reform. I don't consider it reform at all. I consider that trying to make a separate peace with our adversaries. And our adversaries are those who would like to keep the system the way it is. It's unconscionable, it's unnecessary, it is an encumbrance to every business and job creator and innovator in this state. You look out, come out, look over the Devon Tower. That was started by a father and his son with 4.5 employees a generation ago. We don't know how many Devons are being thwarted, or not getting off the ground, or aren't even going into business in the first place. But we do know this, that government is obliged, first and foremost, to create a level playing field for a just and a sustainable society. Workers' compensation, as it is presently constructed, is far from that. Only 2 states out of 48 have an adversarial system. We are 42 times more likely to go to court, 42 times more likely to lawyer up than is Texas. What's wrong? Well, the idea is the premise in the first place. Many of us have had roof property casualty claims. We didn't lawyer up. Many of us have had fender benders. We didn't lawyer up. And in 48 other states, they can deal with workers' compensation through an administrative system without lawyering up. This is our time. Thank goodness the Speaker Pro Tem realizes that, has taken this on as a signature issue. But there's 2 ways we can tell whether we're going to have a real full measure of workers' compensation at the end of the 2013 session. Number 1, are the lawyers happy with it? They're happy. I'm not happy. Mom is not happy. Nobody's happy. And secondly, we can follow the numbers. 258 versus $1. Keep that in mind. Our website, which is called Workers' Comp, not Lawyers' Comp, we will continue to follow this and measure this. We're not going to declare victory like when George W., President Bush, was on the aircraft carrier and they said, mission accomplished. We're not going to declare victory. And here's an irony. Part of our funding for the Oklahoma Department of Labor to do the many things we've been entrusted to do by the legislature and on behalf of the people and the businesses of Oklahoma, much of our funding comes from workers' compensation claims. So if my wish is granted by the legislature, if the business people of this state are given the opportunity to have a full measure of reform, our funding goes down. And I think it was Grover Norquist said, I'm not against government, I just want to see it shrink to the size where you can put it in a bathtub and drown it. Now, I didn't say that. Grover Norquist said that. But I do say this, that we must be ever vigilant. It is the nature of government to get ever bigger. I realize we don't have a profit motive at the Department of Labor, but we do have an opportunity to copy the best practices of other states. We're doing that with workers' comp. We're doing that with workers' comp. The question is there the political will to follow through? And I'm hopeful, but no matter how cynical I've previously been in the past, I can't keep up with things at 23rd and Lincoln. They're way beyond my ability to be cynical. I will not declare victory unless our measure is there. And one last thought on workers' compensation. I went to a nursing home in Muskogee, Oklahoma, and I talked to a nursing home operator. He said, I pay my employees $60 less each month. $60 less each month than I do in nursing homes in Missouri. And I said, well, how come? He said, well, your parents were right. There is no money tree in the backyard. Your parents are right. I am reimbursed the same level from the federal government for each one of our clients, patients. And in order to make up those onerous workers' comp rates, which in the case of nursing homes are 3.5 times more accelerate, 3.5 times higher, I have to pull it out of somewhere, not the money tree. It comes out of the working women. This is most likely to be a woman who works in a nursing home. And women who work real hard for a real important job are making $60 less each month in Muskogee, Oklahoma. I think that is an injustice to all Oklahomans. That's enough to buy 2 or 3 sacks of groceries, a tank full of gas. It's real money to people who work real hard. It's time we address the issue. Let's acknowledge that our adversaries are those people who put money into the campaign coffers of Republicans and Democrats and would like to see the system kind of remain a little unchanged. We don't need to go there. I want to speak to another issue which is near and dear to my heart, which is entrepreneurial excellence. It's my background. I've founded companies. I've created jobs in Oklahoma. I've got to deal in different marketplaces. And Brenda Renaud went out and worked hard for right to work, as many of you did in this room. I've chosen to recognize entrepreneurs around the state of Oklahoma, job creators. We went to McCubbin Hosiery earlier today, 100 jobs that are just a few miles to the west of here, that are created in Oklahoma. They distribute their product around not just the United States, but the world. 15,000 different outlets of distribution, 100 jobs in Oklahoma, 3 generations in the same family. I was inspired by Ed Malzahn, who started a company you may know of called Ditch Witch. He's 90 years young. After he gave us a tour in 2010, I said, Mr. Malzahn, well, why did your family start this company? Was it to feed the global village? Was it to pay taxes? What was it? These weren't his exact words, but his answer was because he wanted to feed his children. He loves his wife. And he wanted to pursue his ideal of American exceptionalism. And that's something that I think, all can appreciate. Perhaps all have benefited from the Ed Malzahns of Oklahoma. And it's something we should recognize, that they can choose to do business here or not. Let's deliver a level playing field insofar as taxation, regulation. Let's not consider them to be something that is just to be milked for their taxes. And because money goes where money is. I talked to a politician who's been praised a lot lately, and I will not name. I once asked him, I said, well, why is it that you're a Republican? I thought I'd get an answer something along the lines of Austrian economics, free market principles, liberty for the family, something along those lines. And the answer was shockingly apolitical or unpolitical, or he said, well, because I thought that's where the opportunity was to get ahead. And I've always kept that in the back of my mind. And I think that part of that comes from life experience. This particular person really probably has never drawn a check in his life except a government check or a political check. And he's very good, he's charming, he's charismatic, he's debonair. He knows how to say the right thing, but I harken back to another 90-year-old gentleman who passed away this past year, George McGovern. George McGovern, who was kind of an anti-hero of mine back in the 70s, ran for president, as some of you that have girth and grade may remember. But George McGovern, after he was knocked out of the Senate by the Reagan Revolution in '80, went to start a small business in Connecticut. It was a boutique hotel. And when he started this hotel with his business partner, for the first time in his life, he encountered nanny state regulation. He encountered inspectors from the city, from the county, from the state, from the federal OSHA. He encountered competition, taxation, workers' comp fraud, bankers, customers, had to fix breakfast for people, all that. He went broke. He went broke. And he wrote an article about circa 1992 in the Wall Street Journal where he said, if I had had that life experience of attempting to run a business and failing, before I was a United States Senator from South Dakota, I would have made a finer United States Senator. If I had had that life experience before I was a presidential candidate and been elected president of the United States, I would have made a finer president. And kudos to the late Senator George McGovern for his honesty. He was an honest liberal. And similarly, I think we need to keep that in mind. If political ambition is the criteria, then we have a forest full of presidential timber over 23rd and Lincoln. But personally, I would rather have a person in office like George McGovern after he'd had that life experience of trying, failing, signing the front of a check. And one last thing, I know I'm over time, but I have finally concluded why I'm a conservative. And I think you can tell a lot about a person. I used to go to England where we had an office, and I would always ask people, well, who's your hero? Who is your hero? And you can tell a lot about people by what their answer is. And I would get answers like Lawrence of Arabia, Winston Churchill, you know, the Beckham, the soccer star, all sorts of off-the-wall answers. I never did ask this Irishman who worked there, because he'd already been employed by the time I got there. His name was John Jordan. He was from Limerick, Ireland. And I started to ask people, say, well, living or dead. And I went up to John Jordan. I said, well, John, I said, well, tell me, which Englishman do you admire most, living or dead? He goes, oh, I much more admire them dead, was his answer. But my personal hero, someone who I extol above all, perhaps all other Americans that I know of, and is Jimi Hendrix. And probably not the Jimi Hendrix you're thinking of. The Jimi Hendrix I'm thinking of was a freckled-faced, red-haired, oldest son of 13 of a sharecropper out of Arkansas, who was drafted and went off to serve in World War II. And he found himself the day after Christmas in 1944 in the heart, the thick of the Battle of the Bulge and General Patton's army. And he started that day thinking it would be his last. And he approached on his half-track what were two 88mm cannon installations that were firing and taking out the troops that were all around him. Well, what the Germans didn't know that this 19-year-old teenager from Arkansas had fed his family through the darkest days of the Depression by killing animals with a gun. He was a cracker shot. And the next thing they thought a whole platoon, a whole battalion was upon them. So the 16 German soldiers surrendered, and they realized there was still one GI. So the last German to come out of their facility realized there's just one, took out his gun, and he also met the fate. Later that same day, there were two GIs that were pinned down by machine gun battle, injured, dying perhaps. My Jimi Hendrix got off his half-track once again and pulled them one by one out of, and miraculously out of the field of battle. And he survived and they survived. And if that wasn't enough, later that same day, my Jimi Hendrix saw another man who was burning to death, or on the verge of burning to death, in another half-track, and once again he rescued him. When I thought of Jimi Hendrix, the words that came back to me were the words of Shakespeare. I know that some of you can relate to this who have been in the service, when Shakespeare said, we few, we happy few, we banded brothers. He who would shed his blood with me this day, he is my brother. Jimi Hendrix did what he did, not for the Congressional Medal of Honor, which he won. He did what he did for the love of his brothers on the field of battle. He did what he did for his mother and his biological brothers and sisters back in Arkansas, for his hearth, for his home. And similarly, that is a hero in my books. And I think that says something about cultural conservatives, of which we're not supposed to be these days. But that, to me, is the sort of culture I would like to conserve and preserve. And that's why I'm proud to be here today. I'm proud to serve as your labor commissioner, and I appreciate all of your support in the past, and I hope that I can continue to earn your goodwill in the future. Thank you all very much.
Any questions?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Well, the settlements under the lawyer's plan more to the individual's page than under the individual's.
Do more go to the injured worker?
How did you work?
Today, I'll just say what it is today. Today, less than 50 cents of every premium dollar goes to an injured worker, his rehabilitation, his medical care, and his compensation. That's pitiful. Every year for 20 years in Arkansas, of the premium dollar, a higher percentage has gone to the worker than had previously gone the previous year. So the difference, the primary difference is that the Arkansas system, the administrative system, squeezes out the fraud, squeezes out the people who are trying to game the system, and truly concentrates on getting the worker back on the job. Yes, sir. So that's why I admire it as much. It's not everyone's system. Yes, Jeanette.
I guess I'm wondering why business in Oklahoma hasn't embraced the opportunity to reduce the premiums they pay, or at least pressure their legislators into doing something about it. If each one of us were to speak to the business owners that we see on a weekly basis, our grocers, our gas stations, our bankers, and impressed upon them that their costs that they pass on to us could be reduced if they would adopt a change in workers' comp administration.
You're right. Two things, though. One, not all business people are adversely affected in their own mind. When I ran our software company, I thought more about the Ozarka water bill and the coffee bill than I did workers' compensation, because we had never had a claim. But the other people who are affected feel trapped. They've heard this talk about workers' comp reform. They've heard it year after year, legislature, politician after politician. But the good news, between the President Pro Tem and, dare I say, Charlie's friends at the State Chamber, and many other manufacturing facilities, the Lieutenant Governor, etc., there's a chorus out there. This is reminiscent of right to work. And you're absolutely right. Please, if you're a business person or know a business person, or even know your legislator, ask them. We need an administrative system. Out with the old, in with the new, and the new works. So yeah, you're right. They will eventually feel the heat. But don't think for a moment that the people who advertise on the back cover of Yellow Pages aren't out in the darkness of night trying to undermine these proposals.
Excuse me, I take that back. Oh, I publish Yellow Pages.
Oh,
And for some strange reason, they won't advertise it.
Sorry.
yes, Brett.
Terry, go ahead.
Okay. I'll tell you what will happen. You have an employee that goes to the emergency room, within 48 hours, they'll start getting mail. Every lawyer in town, hospitals sell the list people who come in and file.
Do they really?
Yes. They have to. How else would the employees will start getting letters and phone calls from lawyers? Nobody was then, not long before I would file the claim. And I had that happen about 10 years ago. So many first
Well,
letters.
it is a cesspool of corruption.
Yeah, absolutely.
You mentioned about competition. Is it to the advantage of the larger companies who are established and all, is it to their advantage to have it where the workman's comp is more expensive because it makes it harder for other competition to get into the business, or is that just?
I think that anyone can, the short answer is no, because when you, particularly for safety record do business with unknown safety records. Michelin almost left the state because of workers' compensation. Hobby Lobby, and I kind of left this part out, and I should have spoken to it. Part of it is a self-insurance option in the administrative system that allows the Hobby Lobbies and the Michelins and the Phillips Petroleum, et cetera, to have their own self-insurance system, which is generally much better. You had asked about the workers' result. The whole idea is to compensate a worker when he's off the job or she's off the job and get him back to work. The present system encourages them to stay away. There's a reason why our oxycodone prescriptions in this state are 10 times what they are per capita as California. Part of that's workers' comp.
Richard?
We get so inundated by this system, and we think this system so much, but when I get hurt at home, of course that's not workers' compensation, but I have insurance through my wife's employer in my case, but we have insurance usually through our employer, and there's nothing about that situation that creates an adversarial relationship. My wife doesn't have to sue her employer to get medical care when she gets hurt or sick. Why should she have to be in an adversarial relationship when she gets hurt at work? It's, you paid insurance, and I'm going to make a claim, get better, and come back to work. That's the attitude we have about anything else. Why wouldn't we have the same attitude when they get hurt at work? It's a claim, pay it, go back to work.
Perfect. You're right. It's the only time we lawyer up, generally speaking, is one instance. It's the way Gene Stipe made it.
Because he was a lawyer.
Right. Trial lawyer. Yes, ma'am.
Commissioner, ever since I've lived in this state, we've been talking about reforming the workers' compensation. We're always dumping on the lawyers, but it's not the lawyers who practice workers' compensation law. It's the legislators who make the law.
You're right.
Why don't you dump on me?
Well, I think I did.
No,
Let me
you just say
repeat.
to the lawyers who practice.
Well, first of all, let me be very clear. Let me be very clear. It's not the attorneys per se. Because all other attorneys, aside from workers' comp attorneys, their individual practices are disadvantaged by this onerous hundreds of millions of extra dollars out of the pockets. They're also disadvantaged because most lawyers deal with businesses or people who work for businesses. And if we're driving out businesses from being created in the first place, or driving them to set up their next franchise elsewhere, it hurts all lawyers. So, but I think it would be naive to say that you have to have yeast to make beer, and you need to have sugar to make beer. And the ingredients of our present workers' compensation system advantage only a small slice of our economy.
Last week when Lieutenant Governor Lamb was here, a question asked him, well, who would be against workers' comp reform? Because he made a big issue of the same issue of workers' comp last week too. And he really kind of declined to answer that. And so I got up and suggested that maybe it was the lawyers. And one of the things that we talked about last week was last year, Governor Fallon made it clear to the legislature that we were not going to go to administrative system. And you don't have to, you don't have to say anything here if you want to, but you obviously studied every state, even before you were running the first time, what their systems were, weaknesses and strengths, trying to garner what would be the best for Oklahoma. And of course, Governor Fallon, shortly before she became governor, married a gentleman. His whole career has been a trial lawyer and a worker comp lawyer. And so, in my estimation, my opinion, that has been the reason that we didn't go for real reform last year. As the governor said that she wouldn't support real reform, so it was minor reform. But to the point of the lawyers, you need to understand. They have funded the lawmakers for a long time to protect their little fiefdom. As a matter of fact, I've known candidates who were Democrats who have talked about, I would go to my mailbox every day and here would be letters with checks in it from lawyers, and I had no idea who they were.
Others do that too.
Well, who others do that?
I don't know, I don't keep up with
Yeah.
that.
Well, I can tell you who does do it, and that's the trial lawyers. Because they have wanted to keep the system that was created by Gene Stipe for their benefit first, and wanted to keep it that way. And so I don't shy at all from putting the onus, and those of you know my dad is an attorney. He's not a trial attorney though, but he is an attorney. And there's a difference in that. And so, but we've seen with this last election cycle and this past year, many of the candidates that challenged the more liberal Republicans in a Republican primary, many of those got some support from both Democrat and the challengers got support from both Democrat and Republican trial lawyers because they were angry over the tort reform that had already occurred. And I'm going to tell you, tort reform, as far as I'm concerned, is finished in this state, at least for a while. Have we gone too far or not far enough? We can make a case. We've had trial lawyers here speaking on that issue before. It certainly needed some reform, but you don't want to screw it down to the fact that if you need the tort claim, that you don't have a day in court. That's something you don't want to screw it down that time. But the real problem in Oklahoma has been workers' comp. It's really far more important than tort reform. And so, anyway, it's a difficult situation. You don't have to comment on any of that if you don't want to. That's my statement.
Those are your bills in the legislature.
There's like 33 bills in the legislature. No man's safe while the legislature's in session. We don't really know. We do know that a lot of people would like to see this derailed. We will see what happens.
Any others? Yes.
Just had a quick question.
By the way, I have some magnetic stickers. You want to? You can have two. To stick on your car. If anyone likes them, we got plenty. And I do think it is a matter of letting everyone know we're madder than heck. We're not taking it anymore. We got to fix this system.
So RCPA.com, because I don't see.
Yeah, it's workers' comp. No, sorry, not lawyers' comp.com. Thank you. If you go to McCarville, we have the front top thing. You click on that, it'll get you there.
Can you take us through a typical scenario of abuse of an attorney in a situation like this?
Well,
A case.
well, the first thing that's different is that they pick the treating physician. They go to the emergency room, they're contacted by the attorney, they send them to your lawyer, and suddenly a lot of things that weren't wrong are now wrong with that person. And in order to keep that person off work, they keep treating them. I sold a business at 63rd and Villa. They really wanted the building, not a business, but a building, 63rd and Villa. They turned it into have a rec, get a check kind of business. The scenario under Arkansas is the employer chooses the treating medical facility. That's a huge difference. And by the way, they're not denied their day in court. Once they go before the adjuster, if they don't like it, they can go to an administrative law judge. If they don't like it, they can go before 3 commissioners, like our corporation commission. And if they don't like it, then they can go to court. The difference is it winnows out or weeds out much, if not all, of the fraud and the exaggeration. There's no incentive to do it. If there's a difference of fact, dispute, fair enough, but there's not the incentive. And one last thing, I'm a man over 50 years of age. The average male over 50 years of age has some heart problems or congenital, have heart problems, a little calcium in their hearts. If I go back to the office this afternoon and have a heart attack, that's not the Department of Labor's fault. But the way our system treats it, if you have a back injury because you reach for a file or it's all job related. But it's not. And Arkansas recognizes it. To Richard's point that he made earlier, it's not all job related.
Right.
Do you have anybody in the House and Senate championing this?
There's a lot of, success has many fathers, so I'm looking for, a lot of parents on this one. Hopefully, if it's victory, we'll all declare it. But Representative McCullough had the original bill. President Pro Tem Speaker Dingman is the biggest champion. The speaker has said that he's for it, but sometimes, and I hate to be obvious about this, but your worldview is colored by your life experience. And the speaker did go to law school. So we'll see. He is yet to really firmly, like the President Pro Tem has said, an administrative system.
I don't know if I've ever told you this story or not, but my brother and I, a number of years ago, 30 years ago, were in a partnership, and we had one full-time employee. We'd always employ a summer student, and we were on the verge of hiring another full-time employee. And so when it came time to renew workers' comp for our employee, we couldn't find an insurance company who would write a policy for less than $5,000 premium. Our premium for our employee was about $525. So that means that I've got to have about 9 employees. And in the winter cleaning business, you can't go from 1 to 10 overnight. That's a long, slow buildup to do that. And so that forced me to go to the state fund. And the state fund said, we don't like the category you're in. They changed us to, there's only one official category for window cleaning, that's high-rise. There were 2 others. There were janitorial that also did window cleaning 15 feet and below and 25 feet and below. We didn't do any high-rise, and so we were in that low category, $5.24 per 125. They changed us to a different category. Our rates went up to $63.40 for every $100 that we paid our employee. And so I called them and I said, hey, this is impossible. Well, Sonny Boy, if you don't like it, you can appeal to the Southeast region of the National Council. They were the rate setting board. And so I did, and I worked my way up to the very top fellow there. And they ruled in our favor, but they're only rate setting. They have no regulatory power. So they sent a letter back to the state of Oklahoma. You ought to leave these guys alone. We had some janitorial accounts too. And the state of Oklahoma ruled against us. And so when they finally ruled against us, the next day we took our employee out to work and told him how sorry we were, that yesterday was his last day. And he was, at that time, a 34-year-old ex-Vietnam Marine vet who had worked for us longer than any job he'd ever held and had made more money working for us. And so we had to let him go. We had to drop about 25 accounts, and a month later, our brother and I divided our partnership up, and I've been a one-horse window cleaner ever since. Because if I'm going to operate a legitimate business, I can't afford employees under that. Now, a year later, the state sent us a letter and said, we've reconsidered and we think you can stay there. After we let our employee go, after we have dumped accounts and things like that. And folks, I don't play basketball when the rules are you shoot the basket and while it's in the air, we'll move the basket around where we want. And so I've just been on one horse when it came ever since. And it was over a workers' comp problem.
And take your story and
Thousands of times. Thousands of times. Janet, one last question.
Well, what I was going to suggest is in this regulatory climate, what you do is you cut all your permanent employees part-time or less than 28 hours, and the people that you really need, you put on a contract status, and you're home free. Because you're not paying premiums on anybody.
Our problem is,
But that's
our problem is the
how
particular
the
employee we
regulatory
had.
status is now.
The particular employee we had, as long as he was with one of us, he was a good employee. But you couldn't give him a list of 10 accounts to go to. You couldn't find half of them, and he wouldn't remember what to do when he got there. And so we just couldn't do contract labor with him. So, okay, folks, thank you so much for coming. Martin, thank you very much for being here today. Next week, we will have Avi Lipkin with us, and I look forward to him. I'll pick up a little bit of intelligence as to what's really going on in the Middle East right now. There's probably not a better subject